They're only here.
Hello, everyone. I am Alexa Padilla, Content Director for the symposium, and today we have a very special guest. There is no concise way of describing her, because if I were to list all of her achievements, it would be a monologue. Her curriculum is 25 pages long. Deirdre McCloskey, a distinguished professor of economics, English, communication, history, and the University of Illinois, Chicago, she has written 24 books and nearly 400 academic articles about economic history, feminism, statistical theory, liberalism, rhetoric, ethics, and law. Deirdre has taught for about 12 years at the University of Chicago. She did her undergraduate studies and later obtained a PhD in economics from Harvard University. She describes herself as a quantitative, postmodern, free market, progressive, Episcopalian, ex-Marxist, Midwestern woman from Boston who was once a man. There will be some time for questions and answers at the end of our conference. In the meantime, feel free to write your questions during the conference. And now, it is my honor to present Deirdre McCloskey.
Thank you. Thank you very much, dear. I have two apologies to make. One, that I'm 1 hour late, which is not my custom. I'm ashamed. It's very unprofessional, and I apologize to those of you who have been patient enough to wait. I have excuses, but they're very poor. The other thing to apologize for is that I have a speech defect. I often stutter on the word stutter, so I don't just say I stutter. I do, so you'll have to adjust to that. In all countries, in all cultures, about 2% of the born males, about half of 1% of the born females do stutter. I'm very old, so it's gotten better as I get older. Practice makes perfect. The theme here is a very simple one. It is that your countries, if there are more people than here than people from Mexico, are rich by comparison with what they once were. And by what I mean by once were, I mean in, say, 1800. Your ancestors, Indian and Spanish and others, were unspeakably poor in 1800. I mean so poor as you could express it in modern prices, American dollars, earning, spending, making about $2 a day. $2. Now, it would be very hard for you to get along on $2 a day. There are still people in the world who do, alas, but the percentage of the world that does live on this old standard, this horrible old standard of $2 or $3 a day, has been falling. And contrary to what you may hear, it's especially been falling in the last, say, 30 or 40 years. It's not true that modern are making poorer or the richer. The poor of the world are being massively lifted up. So now the average income in the world is actually, to sort of fix ideas, the current average income of Brazil. If you want to think about a sort of what the average person earns in American dollars, it's about $33 a day. But going from $2 or $3 a day to $33 a day is a factor of 10 and more. And that transforms one's life. Now, true. Mexican national income per head is about $50 a day, higher than Brazil, but still quite far below that of, say, the United States. But it's catching up, and it will. I'm aware of the Mexican proverb, so far from God, so close to los Estados Unidos. But there's no reason why Mexican people or Brazilian people or Indian people or Chinese people can't, in reasonably short time, a couple of generations perhaps, enjoy the same income as the United States or France per head. There's no, in other words, my view of this, and it's a view that's shared by lots of economists, although some have the opposite view, is that there's nothing racial or even geographical about being rich. Being rich comes from adopting the best techniques around for institutions, for in banking, say, or in making iron and steel, or in agriculture, or in education. So, how has this come about? How has this rise, either to $33 a day or $50 a day, or as the case is of the United States, $130 a day? Now, as a sidebar, it's very dangerous and a mistake for people in improving countries like Mexico or Poland to obsess about their failure to achieve the same income as the Germans or the Australians or something. That focus on inequality, which we have a great deal in the world these days, is a deep economic error that in the last 30 or 40 years, world inequality, viewed person by person, you take all the people in the world and arrange them in a Gini diagram or in a frequency distribution. For individuals, inequality has fallen very sharply. Contrary to what you've sometimes been told, it's not rising, it's falling. Why is that? Well, because China and India, which were unspeakably poor, much poorer than Mexico, have been growing very fast. So what's this all about? How did this happen? Well, there are two big explanations that you've been taught in your economics courses. And you can arrange them by politics from left to right. On the right, the explanation of how we get rich and how we anyway get out of this $2 and $3 a day has been capital accumulation. It seems kind of obvious as you look around. You come to my city of Chicago and you see the tall buildings compared with some small village in Kansas, and you're very impressed, and you say, I see. The way to get rich is to build lots of tall buildings and have lots of machinery on your farms, or to speak of human capital, to get more people through university, engineers say, or economists for that matter. And here's the trouble with that. Now, of course, that's what I was taught as a at Harvard as a sort of Keynesian economist, statist, you might say, economist. Then I spent 12 years, as was mentioned, teaching at the University of Chicago. I taught most of the Chicago boys in Brazil and Chile. I didn't teach them to take people up in airplanes and throw them out. I didn't do that. I taught them economics. That's the idea. K, we call it K in economics for capital in German. And you pile up capital and that makes you rich. Well, there's a historical problem with that, which is that lots of economies have had lots of capital accumulation and didn't come close to having the amazing increase in income per head that's happened in the world since 1800. I mean, China built the longest canal in the world, the so-called Grand Canal, and built the Great Wall. I've been on the Great Wall. I was on it last year. They built cathedrals in medieval Europe, and for various reasons, the savings rate in poor economies long ago was actually quite high, yet it didn't result in increasing income. If it was just capital accumulation, this historical argument would say, well, why didn't it happen earlier? People have been accumulating capital since the caves, accumulating arrow points and bows and arrow and horses and so on. Why didn't we get a factor of 10 or of 30, 3,000% increase that countries like France or Japan have experienced in the last century and a half? Why didn't that happen then? But there's also an economic reason, which you can understand very well if you're an economist, which is diminishing returns. That is to say, if all you do is pile up capital with no innovation in mind, with no new idea of what to do in mind, you're going to run into diminishing returns very quickly. My building here, as you can see behind me, the apartment I'm in, this building is 13 stories. It was built in 1912 as a factory and then changed into apartments after a long while. And it's made of reinforced concrete. Now the usual way of making a building is a big sturdy building is with stones, and then you pile them up. You might have some cement in the middle to hold them up. And that was the old way of making buildings. And if all you do is keep building stone buildings, you build this stone building and then you build another and another and another in the same place with the same idea in mind, the same economic purpose in mind. And the fifth building is stupid, is useless. Think of your office buildings on your campus. There are office or halls for teaching. If all the university did was reproduce those buildings and then reproduce them again and again and again, it's obvious that you reach diminishing returns. In other words, observe. It's the new ideas that are crucial. In this case, the case of reinforced concrete, it's the very simple idea of taking an ancient technology that the Chinese and the Romans had and adding inexpensive steel, which was invented in the middle of the 19th century. So it's concrete with steel inside it. So it's extremely strong and you can build tall buildings with it. So that's the right wing argument, capital accumulation. And that's what you'll hear in some of your economics courses. In some of your other economics courses that from a Marxist point of view, you'll hear the other explanation, the, so to speak, the left-wing explanation. I forget whether I put the left here or there, but that's okay. We're talking about we're talking about politics here. And the left-wing explanation is exploitation, of course. It's the surplus. I was once I wouldn't call myself a Marxist. I was too unscholarly to be a real Marxist, but I was a socialist when I was 18 and admired Marx and read a considerable amount and thought of myself as a socialist. So this is what I thought. I thought that the way, say, Europe got rich was by stealing, essentially. Either stealing from India or in an argument that's become very common in the United States in the last few years, stealing from slaves. That slavery was the foundation of prosperity in Europe or in the United States. And again, there are historical problems with this and economic problems. The historical problem is the same as it was with capital accumulation, namely, slave societies have existed since the invention of agriculture. It's agriculture that makes for slaves. When we were hunter-gatherers, if you didn't like the guy who was claiming to be the boss of your little hunter-gatherer group of 15 or 20 people, you walked away. You didn't have to tolerate that. Or you threw a stone at him and that was the end of him, right? So our very long history as humans, as hunter-gatherers, it gives us, I would claim, a free attitude that doesn't tolerate enslavement. But as soon as you have agriculture, there's a surplus, to go back to the Marxist way of talking about it, and you can invest the surplus in swords and horses, and then you can be, as Rousseau said, the person who privatizes the land and is the landlord, and if the peasants don't like it, you go out and hack them to pieces. So, or only hack a few to pieces so that the others behave themselves. So slavery or subordination, or at least hierarchy for men subordinating with women, for example, is very old in agricultural society. And it didn't result for millennia, many millennia. Now we're talking about what? There were 9 independent inventions of agriculture around the world. It's often thought that, agriculture comes from the ancient Near East. That's a lot of baloney. It comes from Mexico, or more exactly, Guatemala, or it comes from Peru, or it comes from sub-Saharan Africa, or New Guinea, or blah, blah, blah. All kinds of places where agriculture was invented. And every time it was invented, it produced slavery, hierarchy. So hierarchy by itself, or slavery is not just a magic sauce like a mullah that you just pour on and it makes the dish. And that's the story. Then again, economic problem, which is that exploitation is an extremely poor way of getting rich. You'd think, well, no, that's not right. If I want to get rich, I can go steal things from a bank. There was a great bank robber in the United States in the 1930s called Sutton. And when they asked Mr. Sutton why he robbed banks, he said, that's where the money is. And so one can do that. But whole societies can't do it. I mean, you And if you're going to exploit, if you're, say, in England, you think, oh boy, I'm going to get rich by exploiting someone else. I'm going to enslave someone else. Would you go to India? India was a very poor country per capita. The place, if you want to steal something from France, which by the standards of the time, the very poor standards of the time, was in the 18th century rich. So there's something deep, and although there's claims to the contrary, slavery is not why the United States was rich. If that was true, then Canada would be very poor. So there's something deeply wrong with this whole idea about exploitation. So, okay, what's the explanation for why Mexico is comparatively rich compared to its past and compared to even a lot of countries now? Why are we in the United States and you in Mexico or people in Japan or Australia or wherever, why are they so much better off than their great grandparents? Well, the answer is, and I always stutter on this very important word for me, so bear with me. The answer is liberty. I claim, and I argue in books, long books, very heavy books, that well, here it's only in two steps. Obviously, for capital accumulation or even exploitation to be productive for the whole country, for the whole of a nation like Mexico, it has to embody new ideas, fresh ideas. The reinforced concrete, the idea of the modern university, which you are now in, was invented in 1810 by von Humboldt in the University of Berlin. The idea of, as I said, inexpensive steel. The idea, my favorite example has nothing to do with science. It's containerization. When Mexico trades with China, it takes standardized boxes invented by a fellow in North Carolina in 1956 of either 20 feet or 40 feet with corrugated sides so they don't collapse when they're piled on top of each other. And you fill it with Mexican stuff, and you send the containers by ship to China, and then they fill it with Chinese stuff and send it back. Containerization, which is just an idea. Once you have cheap steel, containerization is a very easy idea to get and is immensely productive. It raises income. Now, in the first instance, the income goes to the inventor or the entrepreneur. But then there's entry, as you've learned in your economics courses. People enter at the smell of profit. And Malcolm McLean, who was the inventor, ends up rich, but he doesn't get all the gain from this cheaper mode of transportation. The gain is spread around, especially to the consumers. So you get hammers from China that cost $3 a piece, instead of having to have your American hammers that cost $10 a piece. So it's those ideas that made the modern world from the economic point of view, from a strictly economic point of view. But hold it. Let's exercise the same critical thinking that I applied to the right and the left before to my idea, which is a liberal idea. It's neither right-wing nor left-wing. It's floating up in the middle. Why didn't it happen earlier? And the answer is, to go back to the same word, liberalism. Something that, by the way, Mexico seriously experimented with in the late 19th century, unfortunately under a tyrant, and has been experimenting since the American-Canadian-Mexican free trade agreement in the north of Mexico, especially. It's freedom. I keep using the Germanic word freedom, but I shouldn't, because that word, in English at least, in English usage, has come to mean capabilities, ability. But we have words for those that are called income. What I want to argue is that liberty causes increases in income through letting people, as the English say, have a go. Allowing first poor men, then slaves, then Indians, then immigrants, then women, then gay people, then this, then that, allowing people to have a go, to try out things, to move, for example. To move. Free movement is a crucial, I gotta use the word, liberty. And it's the entrepreneurship of the laborer, the entrepreneurship of the ordinary worker who says, I better go to North Dakota and work on an oil rig drilling for oil because the pay there is very good. And then they do. And that yields an increase in income. I mean, obviously to the laborer himself, but then also to the other people who are benefited by his labor. By the way, that's why I'm a free trader in migration. I believe that it's a terrible imposition on human, human liberty to not let people move to, say, the United States if they want to. I'm in favor of open borders, which, just incidentally, I think you all probably know this, but maybe you don't, was essentially the case between Mexico and the United States for a very long time. People would come to the United States, they'd work, but they don't like to live in the United States. They like to live back in their home. So they go home and so they would move back and forth with comparative freedom. It's only under crazy people like Trump that we occasionally in the United States start getting evil about the immigration that made the United States. My people came from Ireland and Norway and England. I mean, come on, we're all immigrants except for the Indians. And even they came from Asia, so hey, everyone's an immigrant. So that freedom of movement is crucial. And then the freedom, the local, small scale freedom of enterprise. You want to start a hairdressing salon in your neighborhood? Go ahead, feel free. That liberty is crucial to the success of an economy. If the economy is in chains from the previous owners of beauty salons preventing you from opening a beauty salon because they require you to have a license or something like that, then you're going to be poorer. I mean, not just the person involved, but everyone's going to be poorer. And then, of course, at the heights, there are great inventions. But I'm making the point that it's not just great inventions, although very importantly, great inventions. And it's not just science. My example of containerization is a good example of a very, very important innovation, economic innovation that made all of us better off. It made some people worse off. Some people are any human action makes some people worse off. If I write a very good book that you all want to read, and oh boy, Deirdre's written this great book, you got to read it, that hurts some other economist or historian who has another book, and you don't read his book, you read mine. See what I mean? So for an economy to be enriching, you've got to have the freedom to have a go, to write your own book, to invent your own kind of plastic, to invent your own containerization, to start your own universities. All this liberty is what made the modern world. And how am I so sure of this? Well, in order to be persuaded of it completely, you have to go back and read my books, especially the last two of a trilogy that I did called The Bourgeois Era. First one was 2006, the other 2006, and then the ones at 2010 and 2016, those two books, they're great thick things. Read those and you'll be convinced, I think, you'll be persuaded that it is liberalism, the coming of the idea that a society should consist of free people with no slaves, no coercion, no subordination of women to men with the fist, no subordination of citizens to the state with the fist, no subordination of slave to the master with the fist. It's the fist that kept us poor. And that's why up to around 1800, all countries were poor, because the fist reigned. And it was in the interest of the elite to keep the sword in their hand and their fist prepared to maintain the hierarchy in society. But in the 18th century, and here it's not there's not some special merit of Europeans in this. Pardon me. My claim is, excuse me. My claim is that it was an accident, that it could have happened in China or Japan or India or the Ottoman Empire, which were all very thoroughly developed commercial empires. Sorry. But it didn't. But by accident in Europe, by the 1700s, the idea, and here's the idea source of all this, the idea of a free society in which people are not subordinated became, in some parts, especially in England and Scotland, and then the North American colonies, Holland to begin with, that was where it all started. And then it spread to England and Spain, to France and Spain and everywhere else. The idea of a free society, I gotta stop using the word free, but a liberated society. And so my claim, and here I'll end, I claim to have answered the central question in economics, which was asked first and with an attempted answer by Adam Smith in 1776 in his great book, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. And my solution is neither the right or the left, a capital exploit ideas. It's a liberated population that's able to have science when science is involved, that's able to have capital investment when capital investment is involved, that makes for the enormous enrichment of the modern world. Now, this, you can call this to make up, it's not really, it's a rather uncommon adjective in English, but it's an ideational explanation. You can't use the word idealism because that means something in philosophy that's I don't mean here. It's an ideational explanation of the modern world. That doesn't mean that, well, here's what it means in practical terms for the future of Mexico and the United States and everywhere else. If you don't keep people liberated, you will become poor. A good way of becoming poor, of overregulation, or of nationalization, or even slower, but also impoverishing tyranny of protectionism, the extremely foolish foreign trade policy that Trump has embarked on, which I hope, by the way, in a month, that'll all be over. So here's the advice. Here's the punchline. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to advocate for liberty. As Adam Smith said, the obvious and simple system of natural liberty. Because it is obvious and simple. At least it is to us in the modern world. To someone in 1776, it sounded very strange. What? You don't want to have hierarchy? You don't want to have kings and peasants and, the family dog? You don't want to have a hierarchy? That would be terrible. How would we keep the society together? That would be terrible. It turned out, and this is one of the great discoveries of the 19th century in social science and in practical politics, that if you leave people alone, they become prosperous and and virtuous indeed. So the way forward is freedom, or I keep saying it, liberty. That's the way forward. And the planning, the authoritarianism, the let's keep the oil industry owned by the government in Mexico. Let's nationalize it in Venezuela. You can see the result there. Let's do this. Let's do that. Let's invest in capital here and do this there by top-down planning is very flattering to young people who are going to be the planners, like you people. And I felt the same way when I was your age. I said, oh boy, we're going to go down to Washington and run the American economy. But that's not how an economy becomes rich and free. So thank you very much. And I apologize again for my disgraceful and unprofessional failure to show up on time. Don't do it. Don't do as I do. Do as I say.
Don't worry about it. It can happen. Thank you so much for your input. We will now be...
You're frozen, dear. There you are.
Thank you so much for your input. We will now be moving to some questions from the audience. The first question we have is
Is capitalism
Is capitalism bad for a foreseeable future, or should we introduce a new economic system?
Yeah. Well,
were you able to hear that?
Yes, I was able to hear it, but there's a feedback somehow. So there's an echo in at least what I hear. But anyway, should we keep capitalism? Well, in the first place, we should stop calling it capitalism. Capitalism is a kind of scientific mistake compressed into a word. Because as I pointed out, accumulating capital is not what made the modern world. It's not what made us rich. Accumulating capital is necessary if you're going to have a 13-story reinforced concrete building like my own. You got to invest in it. Okay, yeah, that's fine. But it's not causal. You can't just build a 13-story reinforced concrete building in the middle of the Sonora desert and expect it to accomplish anything, right? Sheer investment isn't causal. It's caused by an idea for the investment. So, what should this system we have be called since 1800? It should be called innovism. That's the correct word, innovism. Because for matters low and high, it depends on human creativity and human innovation. That's what made us rich, not capital accumulation, not exploitation. So should we keep this? Yes, we should. We should keep innovism. In fact, we should try to make it better. And the way to make it better is not to bring the government in to make investments. The best way to make it better is to leave people alone. My co-author, Art Carden, and I have a book coming out in October called Leave Me Alone and I'll Make You Rich. Leave me alone and I'll make you rich. And that's the basic idea of innovism. It's what's worked in the past. It's not true that government investment has been the source of improvement in Mexico or the United States or anywhere else. On the whole, there's some things the government should do, but not very many. What's been crucial is the ability of workers to move, of people to start small businesses, all of which amount to innovation. So innovism.
Thank you. We also have another question from Regino Vasquez, and the question is, could it be that it is an exclusive phenomenon for Western countries to be more moral the richer that they become?
No, I don't think so. I don't think we become more moral the richer we become necessarily. I mean, Donald Trump claims to be rich and is strikingly unmoral. He's anti-moral. Morality has nothing to do with Donald Trump. No, but it is true that if you're desperately poor, morality is kind of a luxury, right? If I was very poor when I was younger, very, very poor, I would steal to get bread to my children. If I was very poor, like the Central Americans coming up to the United States border, I would cross. Of course I would. Not that that's immoral, by the way. That's not immoral, as I said before. Free migration is the way forward. But anyway, that's a separate matter. But it's not what's not the case, and this is what the first volume in this 3 that I talk about is about. it's not the case that you need to be immoral to be in business. On the contrary, I argue in that book that mostly being in business requires you to be moral.
I agree with you. We also have another question from Alan, and his question is creation of minority and oppressed groups, but at the same time are easily willing to promote socialism and government intervention.
I'm not sure I completely understood it. Could you ask it again? Because there is this kind of hesitation in the link.
Yes.
Ask it again.
What would you say to young people who so frequently promote the liberation of minority and oppressed groups, but at the same time are easily willing to promote socialism and government intervention?
Well, I would say to them, and have said, I have a book last year called Why Liberalism Works. I think it's about to be translated into Spanish, by the way. But and there I point out repeatedly that government intervention usually results in more oppression of poor people or Black people or Indians or transgender people like me or whatever. Now, occasionally, the government does an act of liberation. We fought in the United States a great civil war, which was in aid of freeing slaves, and that was necessary. And we had in the 1960s the Civil Rights Acts and the Voting Rights Acts. And increasingly, women have been freed, often by state action, from various kinds of oppression. But most liberation, well, to express it in the other way, and I often say this in this book, Why Liberalism Works, a lot of the oppression, in fact, much of it comes from the state. A perfect and easy example is the war on drugs, which has ruined my country and your country, almost no matter what your country is. The war on drugs, it's U.S. consumption of drugs that drives all this, and making it illegal has had a terrible effect on every economy and every government from Kansas City to Kabul. And that's a characteristic government act. I'm from the government and I'm here to stop you from doing something that some people don't like.
Definitely. We also have another question from Luis Patricio. You've been getting lots of questions, actually. The next one is, why do young people continue to promote socialist, protectionist, and Marxist ideas, even when they have been refuted both in theory and in practice?
It's a very interesting question. And actually, one of the reasons I was late, is that I was working on an essay and I was in the very passage where I was offering a couple of explanations of why young people like socialism. Ever since 1848, every generation of young people, including me when I was young, have said, oh, socialism, it's wonderful. One reason is that if you grow up in a liberated society that doesn't have slaves on the whole, and you're a teenager, you're growing in a family. Have to. Families are socialist enterprises, from each according to her ability, to each according to his need. And that's how they should be. I mean, it would be horrible to organize a family on market principles where the 4-year-old kid would have to work to have lunch. No, it's a socialist economy. So when a sensitive teenager notices that there are poor people, her impulse is to say, oh, well, I can solve that. Let's bring them into the family, her own family, if she can manage it, or anyway, the family of the nation. So it's the family metaphor, so to speak, the family model that makes socialism attractive. What the young people don't grasp, because they haven't had much experience with it if they're middle class, is that most of the world's work gets done not on socialist principles with central planning of the household and to do each according to his need, but on the basis of voluntary arrangements, deals. On the other hand, a child who grows up on a farm, particularly a subsistence farm, knows the basics, so to speak, of economics, because she knows that you don't get your food if you don't work. She knows that the market allows you to get things you wouldn't otherwise be able to get. So there are other explanations, but I think a central one, and by the way, this is a testable hypothesis in, I don't know what you'd call it, economic sociology, but the attractiveness of socialism comes from its sweet analogy to the family. Now, of course, again and again, thoroughgoing socialism, as in Venezuela, doesn't work because of the temptation to corruption, the temptation to use the power, the immense power that a government running an economy has to favor my friends and to damage my enemies.
And what would you say about inequality? How do you control economic growth externalities such as inequality levels?
Well, let's talk about inequality. I can also talk about externalities also, but let's talk about inequality. In this book that I mentioned, Why Liberalism Works, the long middle section of the book is an analysis of inequality. And I point out that inequality is not the problem. Poverty is the problem. Here's how to view it. Let's say the top of the screen, let's see how to do this. Well, suppose here we've got the average income of Mexican people now. And there are rich Mexicans and poor. Well, how do we help the poor? They're down here. Well, we take from these people at the top and we give to them. And that makes them 20% better off, say. Here's the figure. 20%, 30%, 10%, makes them a little bit better off. Well, hey, you and I would like to be 20% better off, so hey, let's tax those rich people. But what's actually happened over time in Mexican, American, and Japanese history is that we start over here at $2 or $3 a day and end up at $40 a day. That's what's mainly helped the poor. It's not redistribution that saves people from poverty. I mean, the easy case in in Mexico. It's quite startling to remember it. But the longest international border between a rich country and even a middle-income country, and once Mexico was a poor country, but a middle-income country, is the U.S.-Mexican border. Yes, think about it. If you look around the world, you've got, borders with two poor countries next to each other, or borders like between Germany and France with two quite rich countries together. But there's a very sharp. You cross the border of the United States, and if you're a poor person from the south of Mexico, your income goes up by a factor of 7 or 8. It's a quite large increase. That's got nothing to do with inequality. That's not redistribution. It's moving from an unproductive economy in Chiapas to a productive economy in Utah. That's what does it. That's what enriches people. I mean, I have lots of friends whose parents or grandparents came from Mexico. That's what happened to them. Now they have average American incomes once they had the average income of Chiapas. Are you there? I can't hear you, or I can't. There's no. There you are. There you are.
Thank you. We have another question from Lucia. It is, how can we implement liberalism with boundaries in a nation where morals guide politics, social rules, and sometimes even the economy? So should the leaders or the society have to change first?
Well, look, we can't, there's no trick to it. There's no policy. How can I put this? There's no coercion we can do to make people free. We have to persuade them. That's why I write these books. And that's why I'm talking to you. I'm hoping to persuade you, sweet talk, as I call it, to view an economy of liberated people as best for poor people and for everyone else. I think what's behind the question is, what can we do? And I'm afraid all we can do is persuasion. But there are kinds of persuasion that people kind of forget about. Rock music, for example, or country music in the United States, can be a source of liberal thought. In fact, rock music is an interesting example, I think, because it's like jazz in the old days. Jazz and rock music express liberty in the music. And that's a very powerful influence, especially on young people, in making them think in a liberal way. Imagine if you want to think of a nightmare of statism or socialism, suppose there was a ministry of music which had a bunch of people, experts in Ciudad in Mexico, who decided what music you should hear. And you know that would be crazy. That wouldn't be good. So it's the artists, the movie makers, the rock musicians, and so on. They're the ones who are the much more than minds.
Thank you. We have another question. It is, will the U.S. eventually dramatically reduce its manufacturing sector due to the competition from other countries, such as China, that produce much cheaper products?
Yeah. Well, no. I mean, sort of yes and no. The peak of employment in manufacturing in the United States was about 50 or 60 years ago. Yet, the peak of the share of national income that manufacturing in the United States produces is recent. And in any case, if we're not good at making, or express it more exactly, if we're not good at assembling cell phones, someone else should do it. And you think, well, no, that's bad. Then we don't have jobs in the United States. That's achieved internationally the same way it's achieved locally. In fact, the same way it's achieved in your household. If your husband has comparative advantage in auto repair and you have comparative advantage in cooking, then maybe he should do the auto repair and you should do the cooking. If you insist on egalitarian grounds or something and splitting the two, you're going to get less auto repair and less food. You're not going to do as well. So specialization, even inside a household, is the way forward. And it's true internationally too. So the most politicians don't understand this at all. They think that jobs, I mean, unfortunately, Trump doesn't understand it, but either does Biden. So no matter how the American election turns out, we're going to have a continuation of these silly protectionist policies. I actually have hope that if Biden gets elected, as he will, I'm fairly sure, we'll have an improvement of the policies on immigration. And movement of people, as economists point out, is a substitute for movement of goods and the other way around. Movement of goods is a substitute for the movement of people. They have the same economic effect. So free trade.
Our last question is, natural resources are considered by some economists as a course for development, but they can make a difference. They can be considered a head start. So what are your thoughts on losing crucial opportunities by being late?
Well, that's old. I've been dealing with that question for a long time. I first encountered it when I was a young student, actually, of economics. But being late is not in itself a good thing. There's a kind of an economics which says, well, it's better to bomb the current economy because all these people will be put to work rebuilding it. And then we'll have all modern equipment because it'll all be new and we'll be better off. And that's to say that it's better to be bombed than not to be bombed. You can see that there's something terribly crazy about that. But I'm sort of, I've lost track of the, I'm asking again because I've forgotten what the main point is. Go ahead, ask it. Oh, yeah. No, I didn't. No, you don't need to ask it. Natural resources. Natural resources are not what makes countries rich. If that were so, Russia and Congo would be the richest countries in the world. And this is particularly a problem in Latin America and has been for a long time. You'll hear Latin American politicians in Mexico and elsewhere saying, the land is rich, but we are poor. That's what they say. And it's crazy, but that's what they say. Because they regard the way you get rich is having natural resources. Natural resources are a tiny part of the riches of Japan. coal from, sometimes coal too from us, and iron ore from Australia, makes steel, which it then sells to China and Australia. Japan has very few natural resources, and yes, yet it's among the richest countries in the world. Hong Kong, at least before Xi Jinping decided to wreck it, and that's what's going to happen. But Hong Kong had nothing. All it had was a quite good deep sea port, but that's it. Nothing else. No other natural resource. Not any coal or iron or trees or anything else. And yet became almost as rich as the United States per capita. So natural resources are not important. And it's not the case that the reason Mexicans are poor, I've told you that they're not all that poor, but it's not true that the reason they're poor is that someone else is making off, is stealing the natural resources that would otherwise make them rich. That way lies stupid policies like Venezuela's nationalization of the oil industry. The same thing happened in Chile with copper. So no, forget about natural resources. Invent stuff, innovism. Allow people to move, allow people to start new enterprises. That's what makes you rich. Because that's what's happened in Mexico in the last 30 years.
I love that. It's definitely true. I don't think that natural resources are, the key to wealth in a country. So
they're about 5% of national income.
Yeah, no, I agree. And thank you for all your answers and for being able to share all your knowledge with us. It really has been a great pleasure learning from a person as wise as you. And we do apologize for all the technical issues.
No. The apology, speaking of the balance of trade, the apologies come from my side, not from yours. You don't have to have any apologies. It's my fault, and I deeply apologize. I hope this event will be is taped and will be available for people to look at.
Definitely, this will all be recorded on YouTube, and I will send that link to you as well.
Yes.
We do hope you come visit us in Monterey soon.
I will if you give me an honorary degree.
Okay, we'll see about that.
I'm a complete prostitute about honorary degrees. If you want me to talk, give me an honorary degree and I'll come. You don't even have to pay me anything. Just give me an honorary degree.
Perfect. We will see about that.
Add the thing to my my vanity, to my
to your collection.
My collection.
Of course. Well, thank you so much. It really was an honor to have you, and please take care. And we hope to see you soon here.
And I'll continue with my Espanol, my little.
Yes, keep practicing.
More and more words until I can finally read an elementary book for the first grade.
Next time you have to share and read that elementary book with us. Next time we see you, okay?
That's right, indeed.
Okay.
Actually, if you can teach me, you personally, you can teach me some what we call in English nursery rhymes in Spanish.
We will, definitely. We'll give you a long list of them. Yes,
okay.
We will.
Okay,
Thank you
ciao,
so
ciao.
much. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.